thank you so much for agreeing to have this conversation with me and for taking the time out of your busy schedules. We are going to be speaking about paid care work and in special reference to the domestic workers. I think that COVID-19 has presented us an opportunity to evaluate and to also look at ways to enhance the value of the domestic workers bring to households. So I'll quickly introduce all of you. I'll start with Nivatiti. Nivatiti Nanduja is the manager of Women Access to Social Justice with Action Aid. And the two ladies sitting together, we have Hanifa Katwesije. Hanifa, if you could just wave so we know which one it is. Hanifa Katwesije, the chairperson, Domestic Workers Association. Hanifa?
Yes, please.
Yes, Hanifa is the one with a red face mask. Lydia Burite is the manager, Rights, Social Protection and Accountability with Platform for Labor Action. Lydia, do you want to wave at us so we know it's you? We can't help ourselves if the masks are on. But thank you very much, ladies, for joining us. All right, as we start our conversation, I wanted to get a sense of what it's been like for a domestic worker during this period of the lockdown. And Hanifa, I know that you are still a domestic worker, even as you lead the association. Do you want to share with us what your experience has been?
It was on 20th of March, as I was going for work, only to find the gates were closed and there was no entry. But I used my phone to call my boss. She responded positively, but she said, Hanifa, we would like you to do our work, but what you should do, first give us some time. We shall call you. I left that day on 28th March. So I was not allowed to enter into their premises. During the course, I had a number of complaints from my fellow domestic workers who were calling me to intervene, to go and at least talk to the bosses. Why was it done? It was because these domestic workers, most of them were leave-outs, of which they also had families to look after. Although there was also the live-in, who were also harassed during the course of the other 2 weeks, the first lockdown of the 2 weeks. You know, bosses would come back home, they are not paid, they could not listen to a domestic worker. Whether you are sick, whether you are in need of anything, you are not allowed to have any complaint forwarded to them. Others were stopped from work, they were taken as members of the family because they were not ready to pay them their salaries, since they didn't know when was the COVID lockdown would end. Indeed, I managed to move, although it would be beaten. The security was so tight, you are not supposed to move from your home. You'd meet a policeman with a cane, you'd find a way of escaping. It hasn't been okay for the 2 months we have been down on the lockdown. I was called back, but I had already gone to the village where I spent the 2 months. The transport itself had hiked. They asked me for 100,000 to board a lorry, which I used because there was need. My fellow domestic workers were being harassed. I had to intervene. I had to go and mediate. I would talk on behalf of the domestic workers, more especially they live in. They had nowhere to go. They had no money to take them back home. The employers would listen to me. I would express myself as the chairperson. I would introduce myself. In fact, I would move with my card so that it could help my fellow domestic workers to at least gain something, to be understood. Since it was countrywide, everyone was affected. Every domestic worker was affected. Even those who had gone out had the same issues. I was getting complaints from outside also, since I have some domestic workers who had gone there and you are so close to me. Well, we managed to handle some of the issues, although we were supposed to rent out some houses for some domestic workers. How was it done? We would go to LOCs, chairpersons, they would also intervene and give hand. They would at least get where to allocate these people for some days, hoping COVID, the epidemic would at least take a short time. Till today, that there are a number of queries in homes. Husbands and wives have separated. Others have decided they have divorced. There has been some wrangles, fighting. A lady doesn't want to see a housemaid talking to a husband. A lady doesn't want to share the work at home because you're not ready to pay a housemaid. What do you expect? My vice, John, was even stopped from work. He lost the job. He's on the street. He's looking for a job. All this is a cause of the COVID-19. Yet the boss was the best employer who would contribute in all his problems. He could listen and he could even advise him where necessary. Where he could go wrong, he would tell him, please, why can't you do this and that? He even wanted to meet us as the executive so that he could advise us and give us a way forward. He was a well-wisher, whereby even John went to Poland through him. He's the one who took him, and he talked a lot about the domestic work and the problems faced or the challenges we have in the domestic work at large.
All right, Hanifa, you've brought in very many issues that the domestic workers have faced during this time, and I think let's bring in Nivatiti and Lydia to just try to break down each and every one of those. One of the things you mentioned at the start was that the domestic worker is now stuck at home with their employer, and I just want us to look at what that actually means for them. Nivatiti, if you want to weigh in now.
Thank you so much. I think Hanifa has articulated some of the challenges that the women in the informal sector, the women that are in the care economy are encountering right now. You find that as the president of Uganda made it clear on the categories of essential services, the care economy was not classified as one of them. And yet you find that 75% of women, that's where they invest their energy. So you find that the burden of care has really increased during this period, whereby the domestic workers are working extremely hard, as well as the parents, the women and girls in the community towards contributing to this economy. And so when you look at the issue of staying at home, isolation within your family setting, this has posed a serious challenge to the domestic workers. I give an example, they've suffered psychologically. You find that the fact that all the family members are within the household, there is a lot of tension. Usually demands are not well met by the family caregivers. So you find that the burden is squarely put onto the domestic care worker. So you find that if there's a conflict, if there's tension of essentials like services are not provided at household level, the care worker will suffer. First, you find that they sleep less. So you find that they invest a lot of their time in supporting these families, but you find that some don't even have contracts for this period. So some have been terminated. They have nowhere to go for the fact that there's no transport support mechanism, despite the fact that the 3 days they've eased transport. This has not sufficed because they cannot afford the high costs of transport back to their villages. So you find that some are even stuck at the taxi parks. So we need to ensure that the safety of these women and girls is really taken care of. And so what does this mean? We need to devise a clear safety plan at household level and the government as a whole, whereby if you're looking at the minimum wage, what is going to be paid for these categories of people? The fact that the minimum wage bill was shelved at this point, it is time for Parliament of Uganda to rethink of retabling the minimum wage bill, as well as other bills that are before this Parliament before it lapses by July. So we have the employment amendment proposals before Parliament. They need to look at the issues of sexual harassment, issues around safety of workers, and this is where the domestic workers need to be factored in. You find that the COVID-19 has posed a big challenge, and the state actors need to strategize on how we incorporate the demands and the critical issues at hand. You find that the economic situation of the domestic workers and the care economy is going to be affected. And what does this mean? Some are going to be let to go. They'll not have any employment. So this means their livelihood is at stake. So actors, the government need to invest in economic stimulus for the domestic care economy, how we invest in technologies, infrastructure that support the development of this sector. This is very important.
Speak about the minimum wage, and I think I'd like to hear from either Hanifa or Lydia on, for most of the paid care workers that we know, how much, from what range are they getting paid? There was a point in time when we would get about, people would say they'll be paid about 20,000, 30,000 to 70,000 shillings. Is this what they're still paid, or have there been any changes?
I think right now, the range is between, I think that the average is 50,000 shillings. The average is 50,000 shillings for the domestic workers, I think, especially those working in the Kampala metropolitan area, is the 50,000 shillings. That's the average. So, like Nevetiti noted, we need to have surely a minimum wage, a sector-based minimum wage, for example, even in these times like this, like the domestic workers. And now when you look at like the transport, like she noted, they're unable to afford, meaning they'll be working without anything, earning anything substantially.
Lydia,
I just wanted also to add.
Lydia, when you say 50,000 shillings, I just want to be sure, is that for a living or somebody who is transporting themselves every day, coming to and from wherever they are to work?
That was for the average minimum is across the board. It's really across the board. It may even be, it will go for the living, but also for the live out. So it's the average that the median wage that domestic workers earn. And of course, some people end up taking like maybe 70, those who pay 100,000. But even in the current situation, if you look at it, 100,000 shillings right now, those who are working in the Greater Kampala metropolitan area, is very little money for them to be able to earn a living. And yet the employers are not in any way going to increase that particular salary, given that even themselves back at their workplaces, their salaries have been cut. So yeah, it's going to be really very difficult for them. I also wanted to just note something, that another thing that we have noted during this period is that even the awareness campaign around the pandemic itself has not been able to reach the domestic workers. Why? Because in most cases, domestic workers watch TV or listen to radio when their employers are not at home. Now that they're at home, they're unable to access such channels of information. They cannot access those channels of information. So it means that they are not even aware of the different safety measures they ought to be taking for them to be able to protect themselves against the virus itself. So, and even if, for example, some of them have phones, but for you to be able to get information, you have to have data. And like Hanifa noted, most of them, either they were not paid, either their salaries were cut, so they did not have money to buy data for them to be able to use their phones to access this information. So whatever they are hearing is hearsay, not right from the president's mouth or the Minister of Health. And also given the fact that the information is literally in English,
Yes.
has not been translated.
Lydia, the fact that
So
they're with their employers, they are not able to sit down and watch TV as they might have done during the day while everybody else is at work, or listen to radio. So they're basically in a mini prison, and therefore cannot get the information. Yes, Lydia.
Yes. So like I was saying, so the awareness has really missed them. So in terms of their safety, it's a very big challenge for them. And also, we are going to see a lot of child domestic workers also moving forward, because moving forward, people are going to be looking for cheap labor within the domestic work sector itself. So they would want to use the children as domestic workers, especially in the urban informal sectors. So, meaning child labor, even as we move the celebration of the World Day Against Child Labor, the justice tomorrow, it means that one of the sectors where we see a lot of child labor is the domestic work sector. So we are going to see a lot of child labor increasing in the domestic work sector as people look for cheap labor across the board.
Right. Yeah, Lydia,
yes.
I know you have quite a number of things to share, but your mask is falling off, and I don't want us to be breaking regulations, so you might want to cover up. As Natiti, do you want to weigh in on the issue of child labor? We know that the girl child is out of school, same for the boy child, so all the children are home. And if you've sent away the maid before the lockdown, or even when there was a bit of a lull, that means the work has to be done. And it's not just the chores around the house, it's going to be a bit of heavy lifting. Do we see the girl child going back to school after this, when if we go back to school for that term this year?
Actually, the country is caught between a hard rock at the moment. You find that the girl child is not going to school, so they're either at home or they are providing care work. So what does this mean? The country as a whole is at hold in terms of the girl child education. This is where you're going to witness issues of early child marriage. What does this mean? Some parents are going to give away their children. In some regions, for instance, the Eastern region, the high rates of defilement cases. Where is this coming about? There are issues of incest between the relatives within the same household. What does this mean? The girl child is going to be not supported in some communities, whereby some families will not will not afford the education for the girl child. So you'll find that they will prioritize the boy child, and so the girl child will be at home to take care of the sick, to take care of other children that are going to school. But you'll find that the burden and the psychological effect of the girl child is also going to be at stake. So you'll find that the government needs to invest a lot in supporting adolescents, the girl child, to ensure that they are supported at all levels in terms of access to information. When you're talking about education using the different technologies, some communities cannot afford this. So you find that the girls will be pushed to go and fetch water, collect firewood, and this alone is going to affect them in different ways. Yeah.
When we look at most of the paid care workers and even unpaid care workers, we realize that these are people whose education was limited to a certain class. Do you think that this period is going to make that situation even worse? Because we then find that they're unable to I don't know what to use, for their rights or speak out for themselves. Hanifa, do you want to share with us?
Thank you very much, Josephine. The issue of the unpaid work concerning the domestic workers, it's true that a number of girls who are aging, who are lacking education, especially those who either stopped in P6 to senior 4, are the ones who are mainly engaged on this work. But this time round, I also found some of the campuses, those who were at university, because they are lacking support. Of course, they have joined the work. I have a number. The complaint remains, we are looking for something to eat and push us ahead. Although a number of employers are now dropping out those who are those workers who don't know the language. You know, with domestic workers, we have language barrier. Okay. And for this case, a number of them don't know English. They use other languages apart from English, leading to a domestic workers' work at a risk. Thank you.
I think also, Josephine, I think, yes, in terms of during this period, us seeing many of them, many of these girls and girls mostly joining the domestic work sector, yes, it's going to increase. Should the schools not open for the entire year, what then that means? It means that the parents are going to send those children to come and work in the urban centers so they are able to supplement the incomes at work. And which work is there? The work which is there is basically domestic work. So we are going to see many of them. And actually, we are going to record a very increased school dropouts of many of these young girls. And indeed, if you are to do the research, you're going to find them either in agriculture or in domestic work. So yes, the numbers are going to increase of young people joining domestic work during this particular period.
All right, I want us to go back to the salary cuts. When we look at what's happening around the world in a lot of organizations, you're going to find that even the person employing the domestic worker has either been laid off from their job, or whatever money they've been earning from their job has been cut by a certain degree. So they're also coming home to say, look, they cut my money, so I'm going to cut your money as well. And, you know, sometimes maybe it's not choice, but it's something that they feel will, I really don't know, but what are the options then for the domestic work? What does that mean for them, the domestic worker?
When salary cut for domestic workers is definitely a reality. The only difference is that for the domestic workers, what is going to happen is that, you know, most of them are employed on oral agreements. So it means that even where the salary cut was either discussed or not even discussed, nothing is going to happen. So that there is oral, that is it. So it even puts them in a more vulnerable situation for them in terms of the salary cut. But moving forward, domestic workers are just like any other workers. And therefore, if you maintain this person at your workplace and they continue working, and you never discuss anything regarding how best can we resolve ourselves, it means that the employment laws still stand. It means that they worked and therefore they have to be paid their money. But if you discussed it and you say maybe perhaps during this period, I'll give you half instead of full because of ABCD, but going back to the principles, the reason why the different workers all over the world have been paid half is because for them, they were not working. But for the domestic worker, even during this period of COVID-19, in fact, their workload has instead increased, and therefore they were working, especially the live-in domestic workers. So does that really come to salary cut? And yet the person has worked throughout? Because yes, for the office people, they were cut because the activities, the work reduced, and they were unable to go to office to do. Perhaps that's why they negotiated a half pay. But my workplace is more, and I increased.
Just so that the people who have actually been working this whole time don't feel you're picking on them. I know that a lot of people have actually been working, and the hiccups were not because they were not working. It was possibly because the companies were not making as much money as they would have made in previous times. But I hear your point. Nivatiti, I know that we are speaking at about 8 p.m. or so in the night on a Sunday, and we know who is holding the remote control at this time of the night. It is definitely, chances are high, not the domestic worker. What do we say to the employers who are listening right now when it comes to salary cuts and also to just really not paying people because you're sitting at home and you said, I'll do the work myself since I'm at home?
I think the employers in this context need to be quite sympathetic and realistic with the current situation. We need to observe the rights of domestic workers, the rights of everyone that you take care of. You need to ensure that the safety of the worker is priority. You don't send them out without a mask, for example. You don't send them to go to the market when you know there's a queue. So these are issues that the workers need to consider. But I think we need to address the power relations issues between the employers and the domestic care workers. you find that you need to have a dialogue. Communication is very important. If your salary has been cut, you need to devise a plan on how you can pay them. And I think if you have a candid conversation between you and your worker, it becomes easier, and you devise a strategy on how you will pay them. And in situations where you're not in position to pay, at least provide a bare minimum so that person can go back home and also find another strategy. But I think issues of the rights of domestic care workers need to be upheld. Issues about public interest litigation on the rights violations need to be very clear, working with the different actors, different organizations supporting the domestic care economy need to come very close to the people they are supporting so they amplify their voice at this point in time.
So let's take a short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. Nivatiti, before we took a break, we were speaking about the rights of the domestic worker, and I want to hear from you on where you think those rights have been abused the most, and what is the way forward when the ladies who work with you, and gentlemen, I'm assuming you have some of them who are men, when they come to you and say, you know, this is happening, what kind of support do you give?
Indeed, domestic workers have lost a lot. They have nothing to do, but we have to look on the way forward. We, as the leaders of Domestic Workers Association, have decided we shall be meeting in accordance to the President's advice. We are supposed to meet, not closely, at a distance, have discussions, try to advise, more especially on how one is supposed to save. Most domestic workers don't know that they can, on the little money they get, they can save it for the future. Now, for instance, the period you are in now, if at all they had saved, they wouldn't be suffering. Though I was trying to tell them earlier on that please do work and save. And most of our domestic workers are above 18 years, and most of them have children whom they are supposed to look after, more especially pay school fees. So we have tried to give skills, life skills, whereby if one does eatables, those ones at market, no one can move without buying. At least if you are selling, let me say, you are selling liquid soap, that one is essential for the family. And I have also advised them to leave the shyness away. Others say, how would they see me moving with soap or moving home to home? Carrying bottles. But these bottles are bought. If one is at 1,000 each. At the end of the day, you can't go without. You would have something to buy for your family and your soul. Or you look for the range through that.
I just want to also just respond to the question you raised to Hanifa in terms of accessing food by the domestic workers. One of the challenges that, whereas in Kampala, I think the biggest part of Kampala, they got food, but when you look at districts like Wakiso, they do not get food. And yet, we are well aware that most of the domestic workers working in Kampala, if they are live-in domestic workers, they actually come from Wakiso and come and work in Kampala homes. But now Wakiso, most of the biggest part of it did not get food. So it means that most of these women were not able to access food that were being given out by the government. They were not targeted. But going back to the question that you asked, is that the domestic workers working abroad have even faced the worst now scenarios. Remember, the international travels were suspended, and therefore, even if, for example, they wanted to leave or they were facing abuses at the workplaces and they wanted to leave, right now, as we speak, that person is unable to leave the home and be able to come back to their country, like Uganda. So it increases, and for for the migrant domestic workers, it becomes very difficult for them. First of all, they are quarantined in a country which is not theirs. Secondly, even when they are faced with a challenge, they are unable to leave the household. They are unable even to leave the household and go back to the company, even within, let's say, for example, within, let me say, Saudi Arabia. They are unable to leave because even Saudi Arabia had limitations around travel limitations, even within the country itself. So the challenges that they have faced, perhaps even their abuses have increased with their employers well knowing that they are unable to leave the country for anything to go away. We have had some reports already. There is a case that is being handled right now. During this period, we don't know how true it is, but we saw that a Ugandan domestic worker is being accused of having murdered the employer, that they stabbed the employer, a migrant worker in Saudi Arabia. And you can imagine the emotional traumas. We don't know what caused it. We don't know how true it is. But right now she's at police. So you can imagine there are so many other abuses. Other people have reported non-payment of their wages because also their employers were saying they are not also earning. So, and like you noted, the salary cuts were all over the world. So meaning even the employers of these domestic workers in the Middle East still face the same challenges. So they have issues of unpaid wages, and we hope that maybe these issues will also be resolved. And that's when we always call upon the government of Uganda in instances around labor migration. And we all know that right now, most of the people who are going to work as domestic workers in Middle East, to be specific, in Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and then currently in UAE. So where is the monitoring mechanism for such workers? Remember at the beginning of the lockdown, the minister responsible for labor, Honorable Rukutana, came out and said they had suspended labor externalization. But in suspension, what does that mean? Does it mean that the companies no longer have responsibilities over the people whom they already deployed? What did the government put in place? So we see that the monitoring bit still lacks in ensuring that they are protected. And I know that their rights violations have even they have worsened during this period, given the circumstances of the restrictions.
Well, Nivatiti, as you close, I would like you to speak to the issue of contracts, because you raised it on why it is important for employers to give their domestic, but also look at the domestic worker as a help. That word help signifies a lot, because it means you're just here to help me, and it takes away the fact that you're actually doing a job that the safety concerns have to be put in place, they have to be paid and things like that.
The issue around contractual management is important. Employers and employees should also appreciate that the fundamental right to have a contract. And this stipulates the terms and conditions within which you're working. And so they should be signed again and probably kept in safe places. In case of any issue, then they are brought to looked at. But I think the issue of collective advocacy for workers' rights is very important at this time, whereby working with the Ministry of Labour and Social Development and other companies that are doing a lot of work around externalization of labor to come very clear to support the people in those countries. That remains very fundamental for the fact that their rights need to be protected wherever they are. But coming back to Parliament, I think it's at this point in time that we need to ratify certain critical protocols. Among them is the International Labour Organization Convention on Women's Decent Work, Unpaid Care Work, and Gender-Responsive Public Services. So these are very critical for us, because government will put in place mechanisms to ensure that sexual harassment in both the public and private spaces is well managed in terms of justice to the vulnerable women and girls. We need to pass the sexual offences bill that is before Parliament. We need to pass the employment amendment bills. So these are critical frameworks that are intended to protect the labor sector, as well as addressing the root causes of violence, issues of wage inequalities, among others. So I call upon other actors to really support the labor movement in ensuring that the rights of vulnerable people are protected.
All right, thank you very much, Nivatiti. And before I let you go, Nivatiti, could you just speak to the employer who is watching you at this moment? What would you like them to say for somebody who has a paid care worker in their house, whether they are paying them now or not, but as long as they have that person with them?
All employers right now, first of all, need to protect the rights of their workers, making sure that they are safe, first of all, and ensuring communication with their relatives. For instance, giving them a phone to speak to their relatives is important, but also ensuring that they provide the basic minimum. It's very important. A case in point is that you find that some need sanitary pads, but they cannot access these services because they have to move longer distances to have them. They cannot access family planning services. How can you support your worker to ensure that they get these basic services to live a decent life, as well as ensure that their psychological well-being is well managed at this point?
All right, thank you very much, Nivatiti. Lydia, would you like your final thought to the employer? Your microphone is muted. I have to first unmute it.
Okay.
All right.
Sorry. So the employer, thank you so much, Josephine. To the employer, first and foremost, I want for them to take domestic work as work, and take domestic work as workers, and not merely as mere help. And once we refer to them as mere helpers, it diminishes the working relationship that this person has with you as an employer. So it's very important that we take our domestic workers as workers and we give them the rights that they ought to be having, not to take them as mere helpers. Because wherever we work, in fact, we are workers. We are not mere helpers of the different companies that we work for. So even at home, these are workers and they need to be respected. Secondly, in this period, I pray that the employer provides protective gears for the domestic worker. As you send them out there to go and shop for the family, to the market, the shop, please know that if you don't give your domestic worker protective gears, it means that when she contracts this particular virus, even your family is at a risk. And therefore, protect her to protect your family, or protect him to protect your family. It's very important. Thirdly, let us also as employers pass on the awareness messages to our domestic workers. Let us ensure that when awareness messages are being communicated, our domestic workers have a chance to listen to them. That way, they become better ambassadors and they become better people to protect your family during this particular period. Let us not put them away and think that they should not, but they ought to be access that particular information. Lastly, as an employer, you have to meet your obligations. One of the cardinal roles in an employment contract is you work and you are paid. If your domestic worker has worked, it is only fair and legal for you to be able to pay this particular domestic worker. If you don't pay them, at some point, they will cheat you. I know that the times are bad, but guess what? The person has worked. At least have a candid discussion and plan when perhaps you can pay that money, as opposed not to pay them at all. Because for sure you know that during this time they worked, and so it is important that you pay them as moving forward. But also to our government, already noted, we have the Employment Amendment Bill 2019 on the floor of Parliament. We ask Parliament that before you go into recess or before this Parliament ends, is to be very important for the first time in Uganda and the history of the country to recognize that domestic work is work and domestic workers are workers. That particular bill before you as members of Parliament it strengthens the protection of the domestic workers. They need legal protection to concretize and strengthen their protection in the community. That is passed as into law. We pray that you pass it. Thirdly, as a country, we need to ratify the ILO Convention number 189 on decent work for domestic workers. In 2011, Uganda supported the passing of that ILO Convention in Geneva. To date, we haven't yet seen the government ratifying it. We pray that we ratify it so that we are able to fulfill our mandate in protecting these very vulnerable workers as we move forward. And thirdly, to the Domestic Workers Association, I pray that you work around to support fellow domestic workers. Times like this, they need emotional support. And for any domestic worker out there, Platform for Labor Action is here to support you with your association, through your association, to provide you legal aid services, to give you someone to talk to. Call on our toll-free line and you'll be supported.
All right, thank you very much, Lydia. I can see that mask has given you quite a headache, but I am thankful. Anyway, Anifa, I will ask you to close our conversation with a message that you'd like to give to employers of domestic workers.
Thank you very much, Josephine. This is a word to our employers and fellow domestic workers. As Madam Lydia has told us, we need to cooperate. We need to listen. After all, we have always talked about our rights and responsibilities. We need to be helped in all ways. And we also need to help our employers. If we are one, we shall have to succeed in each and everything. That's my word. Thank you.
All right, thank you all so much for joining in the conversation. Lydia, thank you very much. And finally, Hanif, it's been a pleasure having you. I know we had a lot of internet issues, but it might finally come to the end of it. Thank you very much.